So it's a combination. It's not one individual. It's the family, I believe, to start with, and then to speak with their advisor, and then to bring in the accountant on board in relation to that as well. And look, obviously, if they're making the decision to go to a succession farm partnership, their solicitor should also be involved in those conversations as well too.
Transferring family farm is a process that should begin early, but the actual transfer of assets may not need to happen immediately. It's important to bring a young person into the business while gradually giving them responsibility to ensure a smooth and successful transition of ownership. There are several ways in which a farm can be transferred. You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow, and leave us a review on Apple or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from. Over the past few weeks, we've discussed the advantages and tools for successfully transferring a family farm. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Ruth Fennell, a collaborative farm specialist with Teagasc. Ruth, you're very welcome to the podcast. Ruth, I just first want to maybe dive into what's the difference between, or what's a standard farm partnership, and then what is a succession farm partnership?
So look, I suppose as the title of my role is collaborative farming specialist, so that in itself gives an indication that I cover all kind of areas where we bring farmers together to work under collaborative arrangements. Part of that is farm partnerships. We also cover in relation to land leasing, share farming. So there's a huge number of different types of collaborations and what we would term partnerships that evolve differently. I suppose when we're talking about the traditional farm partnership, in a lot of cases, that would be farm families now. Originally, when they were set up, it might have been neighbours or farmers with similar enterprises or similar interests where they would have come together to pool their resources. But currently now, they're probably the vast majority of cases are family partnerships. And what they're basically doing is bringing the family in together and working under a collaborative arrangement with the mutual benefit of all the parties involved. And I suppose from the farm partnership point of view, there's two main partnerships really. There's the traditional farm partnership and there's also the succession farm partnership as well too.
So in a farm partnership scenario, everyone takes a risk. People share labor, they share the input costs, and they share profits at the end of the day.
Yes, and the profits then are split in line with the profit sharing ratio that will be stipulated in the agreement that they set out with.
So you mentioned then, so there's a standard farm partnership, but there's also, did you call it a succession farm partnership? Is that the name of it, or is it a slightly different name like that?
Yes, no, that's it. And I suppose the difference between the two of those is, in a lot of cases, people will start with the family farm partnership. And under the family farm partnership model, there's no requirement to transfer any of the assets. So it's an introduction of the next generation into the farming system. They're recognised in the farming business. There's a commitment made that they will have a share of the profits. That has to start with a young trained farmer. That has to start with a minimum of 20% share of the profits. And it involves them within the farming business. The difference then between that and the succession farm partnership is that under the succession farm partnership, there's a requirement to transfer a minimum of 80% of the assets after year 3 and before the end of year 10 in that succession agreement. So that's the main difference between the two. You still have the same operating where there's a share of the profits and that involved, and where the young farmer gets the minimum of the 20% share. But with that succession agreement, there's a commitment made to start transferring assets after the 3rd year of the agreement, where there's no requirement to transfer assets if you just sign up for the standard farm partnership.
Okay, so within that then, so can a farmer, say a farming family setup, can they jump directly into a succession partnership, or do they have to have a standard partnership first to operate for a number of years and then move on to a succession one?
That's very much up to themselves. So we would generally find in a lot of cases they might start, and I suppose it depends on the age of the successor and what stage they're coming into the family business at. What we do kind of recommend is once they finish their formal education, if they have any ambitions to travel or interest to go off and see the rest of the world or work on different places, that should be done before they come home and go on the herd number and join in the partnership agreement. And once then they're involved actively in the farm, the farm partnership is a really good way of recognizing them and giving, recognition of the commitment that they're now making to the farm business. I suppose with the partnership, with the succession partnership, then that often will follow on, but it really depends on the age of the successor as to when they're coming. Because as I mentioned to you there, you're not allowed to transfer any of the assets until at least 3 years of the succession partnership agreement. So I'm sure it was mentioned on the previous podcast in relation to the young trained farmer stamp duty relief. So if you can't transfer for the first 3 years, it's important then that that young farmer, if he's to avail of that 0% stamp duty, that he's less than 32 at the time that they formed that succession agreement. So in a lot of cases, they'll form the standard farm partnership. They may then change within time to a succession partnership, or alternatively, they may just form the succession partnership. But the documentation that is required for the standard farm partnership is also required for the succession agreement, with then the addition of the outlining of the time of the transfer of the assets, which is required in addition with the succession agreement.
So Ruth, with everything you've said in mind there, if I can just get you to put yourself in the space of the experienced farmer, if you like, for a second, what's the advantages there? And maybe then on the other side, what's the advantages of getting into this succession farm partnership for the person taking it over? What are the advantages for both sides?
I suppose for the established or the experienced farmer, they have a lot of years of knowledge and work that they've put into the farm, and they understand how things work. And you can't learn those tools overnight. That's a gradual knowledge and experience of different seasons and how different things react. And I suppose from their point of view, they don't want to, it's very difficult for somebody to step away from that completely overnight. And what happens with the farm partnership, it's a much more gradual transfer. And as I mentioned previously, with the standard farm partnership, there's no requirement to transfer any of the assets within the duration of that partnership. So it allows the next generation to come on board, to bring their skills and their knowledge set that they have and their new ideas, for them to be recognised within the farm business, and it to be recognised that they've made a commitment to come home, and that's recognised as part of their partnership agreement, and also that they're getting a share of the profits. But it allows the gradual transfer of the management and the responsibilities to take place in a much more, I suppose, controlled and gradual manner. So as I said, the young farmer coming on is entitled to a minimum of a 20% share of the profits. But as the roles change and as the partnership develops, that can change over the years, as so too will the input and the experience. And maybe it allows the older generation to gradually step back rather than that happening overnight. And for the younger generation to gradually feel their way into the business, and to take on more and more responsibility throughout the duration of the partnership, rather than them stepping in and having to take over overnight. Do you know that it's a much more gradual process, and it makes everybody much more comfortable, I would imagine, over the years, where one gradually steps back and one gradually steps forward.
Sounds like a pretty ideal type of scenario. So within that, how does a farming family start the process of setting up that type of partnership?
So what we would generally suggest is that they sit around as a family and they have these conversations to see how everybody feels and how the option of a farm partnership sits within the family unit. And I suppose it's important to recognise there may not be one definitive successor within the family. There could be two, a brother and a sister, or so it's a matter of seeing from the family point of view. And as I mentioned earlier, this is often seen as a first step in a succession plan. But I suppose it's sitting down as a family and discussing it as an option as to, is this something that we feel would be a good option, and how best would it work for the family going forward? Once they feel that this might be something that they might have an interest with, the advisors in their own advisors will be able to go through with them the general requirements in relation to forming a farm partnership. And I'm happy to get involved with families as well too, if they want some additional assistance, to just run through the whole procedure with them. And then I suppose their next step then after that is probably to go through the conversation with their accountant too, and just to look at some of the financial implications of making those changes going forward. So it's a combination. It's not one individual. It's the family, I believe, to start with, and then to speak with their advisor, and then to bring in the accountant on board in relation to that as well. And look, obviously, if they're making the decision to go to a succession farm partnership, their solicitor should also be involved in those conversations as well too.
And you mentioned a little bit of this already, I suppose, around the requirements for people coming in and out. But let's just say we have a family out there who have made up their mind that they're going to go down the family partnership route, how do they clarify the roles within that? Who takes on the responsibility? Who is the decision making? How does that maybe even change over time?
I suppose the farm partnership model in itself, there's documents that have to be submitted as part of that application. One is the partnership agreement and the other is the on-farm agreement. And I think they're really good models because what they do is they make you to sit down and have those conversations that maybe you might have put off, or people might be of different understanding. So one person might feel, well, look, I'm going to be able to take every second weekend off, or I'm going to go off for 6 months traveling and do something else during this. It forces the family to sit down and to put a plan in place as to how this is going to operate from a day-to-day basis. And I suppose that's some of the advantages, that it forces you to have those conversations and to have a clear definition as to what roles and responsibility each person is taking on board within that partnership. And those agreements can be updated and can be changed as the partnership develops. And it's a matter of just revising the on-farm agreement or the partnership agreement and submitting that to the partnerships office as the partnership develops over time.
So from a practical sense, let's just say that family had decided that partnership was the way for them. And let's just say it's a mixed farm. There was tillage, but there was also some sort of a livestock enterprise on the other side. Are partnerships, I suppose, flexible in the sense of it's very much tailored to the family themselves? So let's just say in that instance that the new party taking over, the son or daughter, had decided that they really liked the tillage end of the house and they were going to take on that and they were going to make the decisions and the work that end of it, whereas the existing farmer was going to major on the livestock end of it, and obviously there's a bit of coming and going between the two of them. Can that happen this way, or is there that type of flexibility within that it's bespoke, I suppose, for every family?
Look, the word in itself, we have template agreements, and by definition, they are purely a template. So it's up to each family to make the agreement what they want it to be. So as long as they're both actively involved within the farm, whether that's one more so in one enterprise than in the other, the partnership model allows that all to develop as to whichever way the family see it best fits within their unit themselves. So there's no issue with that. And I suppose the template is just to give you guidance and areas that should be covered, but any other topics that you want to include as part of that agreement can be put into that template. But look, I suppose the model in itself is just to make sure that all the important areas are covered and that you can alter that in whichever way that you see fit going forward.
Again, in the previous number of episodes, as we were talking with James MacDonald on the various different elements of succession, tax was a big element of it, and we came back to that a lot, whether it was CGT, stamp duty, or all that. In terms of this succession farm partnership, are there tax advantages to entering that, or are there any disadvantages from that point of view?
I suppose from a family model, it's a very tax efficient way, because if we have two parents and a child together in a registered farm partnership, we can maximize the low rate of tax. So with three partners, they could earn up to 126,000 based on the 2024 tax allowances before they be paying any high rate tax. So there's an advantage with that. In relation to the succession farm partnership, there is also tax incentives for that. So there's €5,000 a year for a maximum of 5 years up until the year prior to the successor's 40th birthday. So assuming that they go in at a young enough age, there could be 25,000 of a tax incentive, and that's split in line with the profit sharing ratio that's outlined in the partnership agreement. So there's advantages with that as well too from a tax point of view.
And is there any advantage or disadvantage route in terms of the asset shift from the parent to the child? Is there any advantage or disadvantage being in that kind of an arrangement?
Well, look at this. There's tax incentives that we said there, and I suppose with the succession agreement, we would kind of be watching in relation to the age, and I suppose from the succession partnership in itself, like I had mentioned, you can't transfer for the first 3 years of that partnership. So you need to be careful that the young farmer is less than 32 at the time that they sign up to that, in relation to being able to avail of the 0% stamp duty for the young trained farmers. So it's a matter of watching that age as well too. And look, there are other advantages from a financial point of view as well too, in relation to the complementary income support for young farmers, in relation to the National Reserve, and then also in relation to from a TAMS point of view. So from a TAMS point of view, a sole trader has a ceiling of 90,000 in relation to his TAMS 3. And that increases then for a registered farm partnership up to 160,000. And where you have a young trained farmer as part of that arrangement, they get the first 90,000 then at 60%. So there's not only the tax incentives, but there's also other financial incentives that are benefit as well then too.
Okay, so that would allow certainly more investments in the farm at a much higher support rate, I suppose.
Yes.
Can I ask you, so on, let's just say a family again gets into this partnership, everything is laid out in front of them. They've thought of all of the elements of it in terms of the workload and profit share and all that kind of thing, and it's all laid out for them over the next say 7 or 10 years. What about the scenario whereby one of the parties is in, maybe one of the parent gets ill, things change relatively quickly. Can that partnership be amended or changed in terms of the responsibilities, maybe the resulting workload, the profit share that might be a part of that? Can it change along the way? Is it, if you like, a living document?
It is, and the department have said that at all times, that they just request that they are updated, and if the on-farm agreement or the partnership agreement changes, that there's just updated documents submitted then to the partnership's office. I suppose the fact that the young farmer is starting at the 20% share of the profits, it is envisaged that over the duration of the partnership that will change as the young farmer takes on more responsibility and a bigger role within the partnership. And in a lot of cases, families may decide not to maybe go the succession farm partnership route, but will gradually transfer the assets throughout the duration of the partnership as they feel it suits within their own family unit. So often we will see it at that stage that the profit sharing ratio will also be altered. And obviously the roles then within the partnership will probably change as well too. So there's no issue. It's a living document, and therefore it will adjust over time depending on what's happening on the ground within the farm as well then too.
I never asked you that question in terms of a bit of support. Is there support for getting that family partnership up and running in the first place?
There's a grant that we call the collaborative farming grant. So what that does is it covers a maximum of 50% up to an upper ceiling of €3,000. So a €1,500 of a grant towards the cost in establishing the farm partnership. What there also is, which was announced 2 years ago, is also a grant that provides assistance for succession planning. So where the farmer is 60 years of old or older and has at least 3 hectares of ground declared on their BIS application in the previous year, they can avail of a succession planning advice grant. And again, that's a 50% grant up to a maximum of €3,000, or €1,500 of a payment. So between the two of those, there's good financial supports to help families work their way through this process.
So just with that in mind and working your way through, obviously that partnership comes to a logical end at some stage or other, whether that's earlier or later in terms of one of the parties gets sick, wants to retire completely or dies or whatever happens. How does that affect, or how do people, if you like, exit a farm partnership? How does that happen?
So look, I suppose from the point of view you asked there, if there was somebody that's deceased, automatically when one of the partners dies within a partnership, the partnership is deemed to have been dissolved on the date of somebody having passed. The partnership's office will provide support to the family as to how they go about making those transitions, and they may decide to reform the partnership where there might be still 2 members within the partnership agreement. So if we had a 3-way partnership and there's still 2 members left and they wish to continue, we can terminate one partnership and resubmit an application to continue the partnership in a new way. But that will be a new partnership application, but that's certainly permitted, assuming that they meet the requirements of the partnership application. Alternatively, in a lot of cases, the young farmer will develop over time and will gradually then maybe take over the farm completely. And it's a matter then of dissolving the partnership, which is done through submitting an application to the partnership's office just to notify them that you wish to terminate the partnership. And then the hard numbers obviously change to remove the partner that's exiting the partnership then as well too.
Okay.
So there isn't any issues with doing that. The one thing they just need to keep in mind is if there is any TAMS applications and where they've got payment above the sole trader rate, there could be clawback in relation to those TAMS payments if they dissolve the partnership within 5 years of having received the final payment. So just to keep an eye on that if it is their intention to dissolve within the next few years.
Ruth, we've covered a lot of ground, not just with yourself, but also with this series with James as well. And certainly the thing that I'm getting from all of this is that families need to do a lot of sitting down and talking to each other and thrashing this out and thinking about the issues that mightn't have been spoken about for a long time. You mentioned it already, but you might just remind everyone just at the end here. What's the level of help? Who should they start talking to try and start this conversation out?
I'm a great believer in being open and transparent within families, and that people would understand where they stand long term prior to a will being read following somebody's passing. I think a really good starting point is the farm management team developed a document on transferring the family farm, which was given to all of those that attended the clinics throughout the year in October, which deals with all the plans around succession and inheritance.
That's a Teagasc publication, and that's on our website, is it?
Yes. So the publication that's on transferring the family farm is a really good document which guides people as to where the best places are to start these conversations and where they can get assistance from. And when people ask me, how do you start the conversation? I often say, put that on the kitchen table. We often sit around at the dinner table and people will ask about different, but it's a conversation starter that you can say, look, this is on my mind. What are your thoughts on this? And often those conversations will go much easier than what we think. And people will be worrying about upsetting people, or, will it bring up friction within the family? Often it goes an awful lot easier than what we think. And look, there is assistance out there for families that are having major difficulties in this. There are mediators out there that are specifically trained in relation to dealing with families around having these conversations. And there's huge support from their Teagasc office as well too, and from their advisors to go through some of these conversations and to maybe look at some of the different options that maybe they mightn't have thought at, but just to introduce them to different ideas as to what might work for their individual family as well too.
And finally, Ruth, in terms of information around the partnerships and the succession partnerships, where would somebody get that?
So there's a significant amount of information on the Department of Agriculture website, but we also have a huge amount of that information on the Teagasc website as well, under the farm management and collaborative farming. So there's details both on the standard farm partnerships and also on the succession partnerships. And we have a few publications done in relation to the forming of a farm partnership as well too, that are available to download from the Teagasc website, and that's been updated this year. So it gives all the relevant up-to-date information on farm partnerships that's available for anybody that wishes to download. That's
brilliant, Ruth. Thanks very much. And thanks again for your time.
No bother.
My thanks to Ruth for joining me on the show. And if you want more information on succession or partnerships, the teagasc.ie website should be able to answer most of your questions. Finally, if you enjoyed the podcast, please recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, don't forget to rate, review, and follow on Apple or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.